To understand how the law had impacted their respective industries, companies were asked to agree or disagree with 20 observations various stakeholders had made. 78% of companies agreed that they had improved their ability to respond to consumer requests for conflict mineral-related information, the most agreement observed. The least agreement was observed with the statement that they had identified opportunities for consolidation and supply chain cost reduction. Interestingly, many companies foresaw that suppliers who did not comply with their conflict mineral policy could be penalized, including having their contract terminated. 24% of companies stated that they are purposefully avoiding procurement of 3TG materials from the covered countries. One of the deterrents, evidently, is the higher reporting costs associated with sourcing in region. To name 3 examples, one company stated it would need to pay $50,000 for an audit starting in 2016, which would not be required if not sourcing from the DRC. Another company stated that 25% of its compliance costs were due to the continuation of covered country conflict-free sourcing. A third stated that direct tracing and supplier engagement resulted in 50% higher compliance costs. Stigmatization of sources from the region was another potential issue, and one company pointed to potential reputational risk. It thus appears that there are disincentives associated with even responsible sourcing, results which may very well contravene the law's objectives. In short, companies have varied experiences and divergent views vis-à-vis Dodd-Frank Section 1502. For some who neither agree nor disagree, it may be too early to tell. Some companies perceive benefits where others see disadvantages. What is clear is that the law and rule affect them each differently, and companies were split whether the compliance effort offered some or no value added. Rarely do companies welcome regulation, with the exception perhaps of Citigroup CEO Chuck Prince in 2007. While some companies agreed with the spirit of the law, others derided it as social engineering. Some companies expressed having reservations about the law, which can be boiled down to 4 chief concerns. One issuer noted, "We use a large number of small local suppliers who are not familiar with the law nor its requirements. We are having to train and help put systems in place for our vendors so that we can comply. We are having to take responsibility for truly managing our supply chain." Another stated, "Particularly within the petroleum exploration sector, the regulation penalizes those companies that engage in both service and product offerings over those that only provide services, since the service-only providers bear no reporting requirements. There are likely numerous industries where similar disparities amongst competitors within a particular market segment exist." With regard to the impact in the DRC, noble cause, but we think it is important to determine if the rule is actually positively impacting the region. It is my understanding the rule has done little to impact the region as intended. With respect to the unfair argument, one company said, "We shouldn't be fighting a war in the business world with public companies only." And another observed, "The rules leave out a tremendous number of key supply chain members, i.e. distributors, brokers, and small private companies." Concerning the principal role of the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission was never intended to be a regulator of social responsibility, and as the SEC treads more on this territory, the effects will likely be unwelcome, according to one issuer. With regard to issuer recommendations, the most frequently stated recommendation was to repeal the law, followed by an appeal for a reasonable de minimis exemption. Others wish that the rule be clarified, questions that are mentioned in the next slide. Among the other suggestions is for a legal instrument to instead focus on the importation of free TGs, certifying smelters or refiners, or removing the audit requirement altogether. Questions which remain include whether polymers and 3TG derivatives were exempted by the law, and issuers also requested more specificity concerning RCIO conduct. One company, trying its level best to follow the rules, is left in the dark by the lack of clarity, and the company is erring on the side of possible overkill. They said, "We have hired a PhD chemist to help us identify possible free TG in the materials that make up our products. Unfortunately, due to 1. The lack of clarification by the SEC on the derivatives issue, and 2. The lack of a de minimis level, most of our costs for compliance are due to trying to identify and then obtain upstream supplier information for extremely low concentrations of organic and inorganic compounds of tin from catalysts, heat stabilizers, etc. in our materials. It is far easier for us to obtain 3TG information from our few electronic suppliers because they are generally more familiar with the rules. Our suspicion is that many other publicly traded companies of predominantly non-electronic products are not holding themselves to the same standard, the same stringent interpretation of the rules. Maybe those companies are wiser if the SEC truly did not intend to have companies chasing down undetectable, by laboratory analysis, concentrations of non-elemental 3TG. We need clarification so we can concentrate on eliminating sourcing of measurable quantities of 3TG from conflict mines, not just spending enormous amounts of money and time on academic exercises. End of quote. On a personal note, I hear you guys, but the academic exercise point is a cheap shot.